Lycia was a geopolitical region in Anatolia in what are now the provinces of Antalya and Muğla on the southern coast of Turkey, and Burdur Province inland. Known to history since the records of ancient Egypt and the Hittite Empire in the Late Bronze Age, it was populated by speakers of the Luwian language group. Written records began to be inscribed in stone in the Lycian language after Lycia's involuntary incorporation into the Achaemenid Empire in the Iron Age. At that time the Luwian speakers were decimated, and Lycia received an influx of Persian speakers. Lycia fought for the Persians in the Persian Wars, but on the defeat of the Achaemenid Empire by the Greeks, it became intermittently a free agent. After a brief membership in the Athenian Empire, it seceded and became independent, was under the Persians again, revolted again, was conquered by Mausolus of Caria, returned to the Persians, and went under Macedonian hegemony at the defeat of the Persians by Alexander the Great. Due to the influx of Greek speakers and the sparsity of the remaining Lycian speakers, Lycia was totally Hellenized under the Macedonians. The Lycian language disappeared from inscriptions and coinage. On defeating Antiochus III in 188, the Romans gave Lycia to Rhodes for 20 years, taking it back in 168 BC. In these latter stages of the Roman Republic, Lycia came to enjoy freedom as part of the Roman Protectorate. The Romans validated home rule officially under the Lycian League in 168 BC. This native government was an early federation with republican principles. These later came to the attention of the framers of the United States Constitution, influencing their thoughts. Despite home rule under republican principles, Lycia was not a sovereign state and had not been since its defeat by the Carians. In 43 AD, the Roman Emperor Claudius dissolved the League. Lycia was incorporated into the Roman Empire with a provincial status. It became an eparchy of the Eastern, or Byzantine Empire, continuing to speak Greek even after being joined by communities of Turkish language speakers in the early second millennium. After the fall of the Byzantine Empire in the 15th century, Lycia was under the Ottoman Empire, and was inherited by the Turkish Republic on the fall of that empire. The Greeks were withdrawn when the border between Greece and Turkey was negotiated in 1923. Geography. The borders of Lycia varied over time, but at its center was the Tek Peninsula of southwestern Turkey, which juts into the Mediterranean Sea in a north-south direction, is bounded on the west by the Gulf of 𝊗𝐿𝐼, and on the east by the Gulf of Antalya. Lycia comprised what is now the westernmost portion of Antalya Province, the easternmost portion of Muğla Province, and the southernmost portion of Burdur Province. In ancient times the surrounding districts were, from west to east, Caria, Pisidia, and Pamphylia, all equally as ancient, and each speaking its own Anatolian language. The name of the Tek Peninsula comes from the former name of Antalya Province, which was Tek Province, named from the Turkish tribe that settled in the region. Physical geography. The region is mainly mountainous, with steep slopes often plunging into the sea. 4 ridges extend from northeast to southwest, roughly, forming the western extremity of the Taurus Mountains. Furthest west of the 4 are 𐊗𐊕𐊐𐊆𐊖, or the 𐊗𐊕𐊐���𐊆 Mountains, extending from about Altiniola, Burdur, southwest to about Oran north of 𝊗𝐿𝐼. This is a fairly low range, peaking at about 2,340 am. To the west of it the steep gorges of 𝊗𝐿𝐼, the ancient Indus, formed the traditional border between Caria and Lycia. The stream, 229 km long, enters the Mediterranean to the west of modern-day 𝊗𝐿𝐼. Upstream it is dammed in 4 places, after an origin in the vicinity of Sarıkavak in Denizli Province. The next ridge to the east is 𝊗𝐿𝐼, the White Mountains, about 150 km long, with a high point at 𝊗𝐿𝐼 tip, 𝊗𝐿𝐼 peak, of 3,024 am. This massif may have been ancient Mount Cragos. Along its western side flows Anai, the Essen River, anciently the Xanthus, Lycianara plus or minus Na, originating in the 𝊗𝐿𝐼 Mountains, flowing south, and transecting the several-mile-long beach at Patara. The Xanthus Valley was the country called Mis in dynastic Lycia, from which the people were the Termalae or Tremalae, or Kragos in the coin inscriptions of Greek Lycia, Kr or Xan Kr. The name of Western Lycia was given by Charles Fellows to it and points of Lycia west of it. The next ridge to the east, ��������������, the Bay Mountains, peaks at ��������������, 3086 am, the highest point of the Turk Peninsula. It is most likely the ancient Massicitus Range. Between �������������� and �������������� is an upland plateau, ����������𐐼, where ancient Mylius was located. The elevation of the town of �����������, which means apple town, from the density of fruit-bearing groves in the region, is 1100 am, which is the highest part of the valley below it. Fellows considered the valley to be central Lycia. The also known as Section I, or White River, the ancient Aedes, brought water from the slopes to the plain, where it pooled in two lakes below the town, Karaga paragraph L and Avlinga paragraph L. Currently the two lakes are dry, the water is being captured on an ongoing basis by irrigation systems for the trees. The Aedes once drained the plain through a chasm to the east, but now flows entirely through pipelines covering the same route, but emptying into the water supplies of Arikanda and Arife. An effort has been made to restore some of the cedar forests cleared in antiquity. The easternmost ridge extends along the east coast of the Turk Peninsula, and is called, generally, Tartali Dağları, the Tartali Mountains. The high point within them is Tartali Dağı, elevation 2366 am, dubbed Mount Olympus in antiquity by the Greeks, remembering Mount Olympus in Greece. These mountains create a rugged coastline called by Fellows Eastern Lycia. Much of it has been reserved as Olympos �������������� Parki. Within the park on the slopes of Mount Olympus is a U-shaped outcrop, 𝊗𝊕𝐿𝐼, above Sirali, from which methane gas, naturally perpetually escaping from below through the rocks, feeds eternal flames. This is the location of ancient Mount Chimera. Through the cul-de-sac between ���������� and Tartali, the ������𐊖, the ancient Limera, flows to the south trickling from the broad valley under Superhighway D400 near downtown 𝐊𝐿𝐼 across a barrier beach into the Mediterranean. This configuration is entirely modern. Upstream the river is impounded behind 𝐊𝐿𝐼 Dam to form an urban-sized reservoir. Below the reservoir a braided stream alternates with a single, small channel flowing through irrigated land. The wide bed gives an indication of the former size of the river. Upstream from the reservoir the stream lies in an unaltered gorge, flowing from the slopes of ����������. The ancient route to Antalya goes up the valley and over the cul-de-sac, as the coast itself is impassable except by boat. The valley was the seat of ancient Salamis, home of the Ptolemyi. Demography: the ancient sources mention about 70 settlements of Lycia. These are situated either along the coastal strip in the protecting coves or on the slopes and hills of the mountain ranges. They are often difficult to access, which in ancient times was a defensive feature. The rugged coastline favored well-defended ports from which, in troubled times, Lycian pirate fleets sallied forth. The principal cities of ancient Lycia were Xanthos, Patara, Myra, Panara, Tlos and Olympos and Phaselis. Cities such as Telmessos and Crya were sometimes listed by classical authors as Carian and sometimes as Lycian. Features and sites of interest. Although the 2nd century AD dialogue Herodotus found the cities of Lycia interesting more for their history than for their monuments, since they have retained none of their former splendor, many relics of the Lycians remain visible today. These relics include the distinctive rock-cut tombs in the sides of cliffs. The British Museum in London has one of the best collections of Lycian artifacts. Latoon, an important centre in Hellenic times of worship for the goddess Leto and her twin children, Apollo and Artemis, and nearby Xanthos, ancient capital of Lycia, constitute a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Turkey's first waymarked long-distance footpath, the Lycian Way, follows part of the coast of the region. The establishment of the path was a private initiative by a British-Turkish woman called Kate Clow. It is intended to support sustainable tourism in smaller mountain villages which are in the process of depopulation. Since it is mainly walked in March, June and September, it also has lengthened the tourism season. The Turkish Culture and Tourism Ministry promotes the Lycian coast as part of the Turkish Riviera or the Turquoise Coast, but the most important part of this is further west near Bodrum. This coast features rocky or sandy beaches at the bases of cliffs and settlements in protected coves that cater to the yachting industry. Ancient language. The eponymous inhabitants of Lycia, the Lycians, spoke Lycian, a member of the Luwian branch of the Anatolian languages, a subfamily of the Indo-European family. Lycian has been attested only between about 500 BC and no later than 300 BC, in a unique alphabet devised for the purpose from the Greek alphabet of Rhodes. However, the Luwian languages originated in Anatolia during the 2nd millennium BC. The country was known by the name of Lykia then, and was under Hittite rule. The gap must be a gap in the use of writing. At about 535 BC, before the first appearance of attested Lycian, the Achaemenid Empire overran Lycia. Despite its resistance, because of which the population of Xanthus was decimated, Lycia became part of the Persian Empire. The first coins with Lycian letters on them appeared not long before 500. Lycia prospered under a monarchy set up by the Persians. Subsequently the Lycians were verbose in stone, carving memorial, historical and governmental inscriptions. Not all of these can yet be entirely understood, due to remaining ignorance of the language. The term dynastic period is used. If the government was any sort of federal democracy, there is no evidence of it, as the term dynastic suggests. Lycia already had been hosting a small enclave of the Dorian Greeks as Doris for some centuries. Rhodes also was Dorian. After the defeat of the Persians by the Greeks, Lycia became open to further Greek settlement. Inscriptions in Lycian diminished, while those in Greek multiplied. Complete assimilation to Greek occurred in the 4th century, after Lycia had come under Alexander the Great and his fellow Macedonians. There is no agreement yet on which Lycian inscription is the very last. No date is later than 300 at the very latest. Subsequently the Macedonians were defeated by the Roman Republic, which for most of its final tenure allowed home rule to the Lycians, including their own language, then Greek. Lycia continued under the single empire, and fell naturally into the Eastern Empire when the division occurred. It was still speaking the Greek of the times when the Eastern Empire became the Byzantine Empire. In the 2nd millennium Anatolia was infiltrated by Turkish-speaking settlers, but they never were very numerous in Lycia. After the fall of the Byzantines in the 15th century, Lycia was under the Ottoman Empire. Turkish and Greek settlements existed side by side, each speaking their own language. All Greek-speaking enclaves in Anatolia were exchanged for Turkish speakers in Greece during the final settlement of the border with Greece at the beginning of the Turkish Republic in 1923. The Turks had won wars with Greece and Armenia in the preceding few years, settling the issue of whether the coast of Anatolia was going to be Greek or Turkish. The intent of the Treaty of Lausanne was to define borders that would not leave substantial populations of one country in another. Some population transfers were enforced. Former Greek villages still stand as ghost towns in Lycia. History, Proto-history. Lycia has a proto-history little suspected by the historians of the 19th century before the decipherment of Hittite and ancient Egyptian, and the discovery of government records pertaining to Lycia and the Lycians. The records for the most part do not offer positive reports of them. They were rebels, pirates and raiders from the point of view of the Hittite and Egyptian empires, in reports of official transactions with Lycians in the Late Bronze Age. The Lycians have left no written records of themselves at all from this period, which suggests that they probably were illiterate. Ancient Egyptian records describe the Lycians as allies of the Hittites. Lycia may have been a member state of the Ashur League of c. 1250 BC, appearing as Likya or 𝊗𝊗�𐆐𝐿𝑖𝑘𝑖𝑎. After the collapse of the Hittite Empire, Lycia emerged as an independent Neo-Hittite kingdom. The latter term was assigned to remnant states that continued after the fall of the Hittite Empire. It is entirely conventional. These states were not Hittite in any way. For the most part they spoke languages of the Luwian family. Age of Legend. Civilization in the Mediterranean collapsed into a period of decentralization, migrations and civil and international warfare after about 1200 BC. Lycian proto-history came to an end. there is nothing except legend to fill the gap until history begins with the classical Greek historian, Herodotus, who mentions them extensively. The stories of the early Lycians were told by Greek authors of the classical period. Sufficient gaps in their knowledge exist to cast doubt on the historicity of everything they had to say. They knew nothing of the Hittite Empire or the state of Lycia within it. All memory of the Bronze Age Greek script, Linear B, had been lost. They did not know that Anatolia once spoke languages of the Anatolian language group, or that Lycian was such a language. Except for a few basic generalities, such as that the Lycians probably fought in the Trojan War, nothing mentioned by the works produced under the name of Homer or the other poets, or anything said by Herodotus about Lycians prior to his own time, is generally granted any historical validity. In the absence of knowledge, the historians of the past often wrote of Lycian legends as though they had a historical basis. However, all the legends are at odds with archaeological and proto-historic realities. It is unlikely, for example, that the Lycians come from Crete. They are known to have been a Luwian-speaking people, and there is not a trace of evidence that Luwians lived on Crete. According to Herodotus, Europa had two sons, Sarpedon and Minos. When they contended for the kingship of Crete, their native land, Minos drove Sarpedon and his people, the Thermalae, into exile. They landed in Mileas, bearing the ancient name of the country known later as Lycia, which was tenanted by the Ptolemy. Subsequently Lycus, the son of Pandion II of Athens, driven into exile by his brother, King Aegeus, settled among the Thermalae. They named it Lycia after him. Herodotus ends his tale with the observation that the Lycians were matrilineal. Lycia appears elsewhere in Greek myth, such as in the story of Bellerophon, who eventually succeeded to the throne of the Lycian king Iobates. Lycia was frequently mentioned by Homer as an ally of Troy. In Homer's Iliad, the Lycian contingent was said to have been led by two esteemed warriors, Sarpedon and Glaucus. Dynastic Period, acquisition by Cyrus the Great. Herodotus writes more credibly of contemporaneous events, especially where they concerned his native land. Asia Minor had been partly conquered by the Iranians, starting with the Scythians, then the Medes. The latter were defeated by the Persians, who incorporated them and their lands into the new Persian Empire. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid dynasty, resolved to complete the conquest of Anatolia as a prelude to operations further west, to be carried out by his successors. He assigned the task to Harpagus, a Median general, who proceeded to subdue the various states of Anatolia, one by one, some by convincing them to submit, others through military action. Arriving at the southern coast of Anatolia in 546 BC, the army of Harpagus encountered no problem with the Carians and their immediate Greek neighbors and alien populations, who submitted peacefully. In the Xanthus Valley an army of 𝊗𝐊𝐊𝐿𝐴ns sallied out to meet them, fighting determinedly, although vastly outnumbered. Driven into the citadel, they collected all their property, dependents and slaves into a central building, and burned them up. Then, after taking an oath not to surrender, they died to a man fighting the Persians, foreshadowing and perhaps setting an example for Spartan conduct at the Battle of Thermopylae a few generations later. Coincidentally, archaeology has turned up a major fire on the Acropolis of Xanthus in the mid-6th century BC, but as Anthony Keene points out, there is no way to connect that fire with the event presented by Herodotus. It might have been another fire. The Cornians, says Herodotus, followed a similar example immediately after. If there was an attempt by any of the states of Lycia to join forces, as happened in Greece 50 years later, there is no record of it, suggesting that no central government existed. Each state awaited its own fate alone. Herodotus also says or implies that 80 𝊗𝐿𝐴n families were away at the time, perhaps with the herd animals in alpine summer pastures, but helped repopulate the place. However, he reports, the 𝊗𝐿𝐴ns of his time were mainly descended from non-𝊗𝐿𝐴ns. Looking for any nuance that might shed light on the repopulation of Xanthus, Keene interprets Herodotus those Lycians who now say that they are 𝊗𝐿𝐴ns to mean that Xanthus was repopulated by other Lycians. Herodotus says nothing of the remainder of Lycia. Presumably, that is true because they submitted without further incident. Lycia was well populated and flourished as a Persian satrapy. Moreover, they spoke mainly Lycian. The Harper-Gid theory was initiated by Charles Fellows, discoverer of the ���㊎������� obelisk, and person responsible for the transportation of the ���㊎���� marbles from Lycia to the British Museum. Fellows could not read the Lycian inscription, except for one line identifying a person of a legible name, to whom the monument was erected, termed the son of 𝊗𝊗𝐿𝐿𝐿 in Lycian, equivalent to Greek ♦. Concluding that this person was the conqueror of Lycia in 546, Fellows conjectured that ♦ had been made permanent satrap of Lycia for his services. Moreover, the position was hereditary, creating a Harper-Gid dynasty. This view prevailed nearly without question for several generations. To the inscriptions of the 𝊗㐿���� obelisk were added those of the Latoon trilingual, which gave a sequel, as it were, to the names on the obelisk. Studies of coin legends, initiated by Fellows, went on. Currently most, but not all, of the Harper-Gid theory, has been rejected. The Achaemenids utilized no permanent satrapies. The political circumstances changed too often. The conqueror of new lands was seldom made their satrap. He went on to other conquests. It was not the Persian custom to grant hereditary satrapies. Satrap was only a step in the cursus honorum. And finally, a destitute mountain country would have been a poor reward for Cyrus' best general. The main evidence against the Harper-Gid theory is the reconstruction of the name of the 𝊗㐿���� obelisk's deceased as Lycian Carragher, Greek Gergis, a king reigning approximately 440–410 BC, over a century later than the conqueror of Lycia. The next logical possibility is that Carragher's father, 𝊗𝊗𝐿𝐿𝐿, was a descendant of the conqueror. In opposition, Keane reconstructs the dynastic sequence from coin inscriptions as follows. Carragher had two grandfathers, ���𝐿𝐿𝐿 and Carragher. The younger Carragher was the successor of ���𝐿𝐿𝐿. The latter's son, therefore, Khazagher, who was Carragher's uncle, must have predeceased ���𝐿𝐿𝐿. 𝊗𝊗𝐿𝐿 was listed as regnant on two other inscriptions, but he did not succeed ���𝐿𝐿𝐿. He must therefore have married a daughter of ���𝐿𝐿𝐿, and have also predeceased the long-lived ���𝐿𝐿𝐿. The latter then was too old to reign de facto. On the contemporaneous deaths of both him and his son-in-law, Carragher, named after his paternal grandfather, acquired the throne. ���𝐿𝐿𝐿 was the first king recorded for certain in the coin legends. He reigned approximately 480–440. 𝊗𝊗𝐿𝐿𝐿 was not related by blood. The conqueror, therefore, was not the founder of the line, which was not Harper-Gid. An Iranian family, however, producing some other ♦ did live in Lycia and was of sufficient rank to marry the king's daughter. As to whether the Iranian family were related to any satrap, probably not. Herodotus says that satrapy 1 consisted of Ionia, Magnesia, Aeolia, Caria, Lycia, Mylia, and Pamphylia, who together paid a tax of 400 silver talents. This satrapy was later broken up and recombined. Keane hypothesizes that since Caria had responsibility for the king's highway through Lycia, Lycia and Caria were a satrapy. The Lycian monarchy, the Achaemenid policy toward Lycia was hands-off. There was not even a satrap stationed in the country. The reason for this tolerance after such a determined initial resistance is that the Iranians were utilizing another method of control, the placement of aristocratic Persian families in a region to exercise putative home rule. There is some evidence that the Lycian population was not as docile as the Persian handoff policy would suggest. A section of the Persepolis administrative archives called the Persepolis Fortification Tablets, regarding the redistribution of goods and services in the Persepolis palace economy, mentions some redistributed prisoners of war, among whom were the Termla or Termlia, Lycian 𝊗𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿, Lycians. They lived during the reign of Darius I, the tablets dating from 509. For closer attention to their conquered, the Persian government preferred to establish a client state, setting up a monarchy under their control. The term dynast has come into use among English-speaking scholars, but that is not a native term. The Lycian inscriptions indicate the monarch was titled 𝐴 ± Tuati, more phonetically 𝐴 ± Tuati. The holders of this title can be traced in coin legends, having been given the right to coin. Lycia had a single monarch, who ruled the entire country from a palace at Xanthos. The monarchy was hereditary, hence the term dynast. It was utilized by Persia as a means of transmitting Persian policy. It must have been they who put down local resistance and transported the prisoners to Persepolis, or ordered them transported. Some members of the dynasty were Iranian, but mainly it was native Lycian. If the survivors of 546 were in fact herdsmen, then all the ���������������� nobility had perished, and the Persians must have designated some other Lycian noble, whom they could trust. The first dynast is believed to be the person mentioned in the last line of the Greek epigram inscribed on the ����������𝐴 obelisk, which says this monument has brought glory to the family of 𝐊𝐿𝐴, which has a letter missing. It is probably not Caracas, for Caraca, as the latter is translated in Altun trilingual as Gergis. A more likely possibility is Cassicus for Kasiga, the same as Caraga's uncle, the successor to ���㗉����, who predeceased him. Herodotus mentions that the leader of the Lycian fleet under Xerxes in the Second Persian War of 480 BC was 𝑘𝑖𝑏 Niska, previously interpreted as Cyberniscus, the son of Sycas, two non-Lycian names. A slight regrouping of the letters obtains 𝑘𝑖𝑏 Kosica, Cybernis, son of Kosicas, where Kosicas is for Kasiga. Cybernis went to the bottom of the Straits of Salamis with the entire Lycian fleet in the Battle of Salamis, but he may be commemorated by the Harper tomb. In this view, he was the 𝑘𝑢b of the first coin legends, dated to the window, 520-500. The date would have been more towards 500. There is a gap, however, between him and 𝑘𝑢b, who should have had a father named the same as his son, Kasiga. The name 𝑘𝑖𝑏 does not appear again. Keene suggests that Darius I created the kingship on reorganizing the satrapies in 525, and that on the intestate death of 𝑘𝑖𝑏 in battle, the Persians chose another relative named Kasiga, who was the father of 𝑘𝑢b. The Lycian dynasty may therefore be summarized as follows: Classical period, following the ousting of the Persians, as Athens and Sparta fought the Peloponnesian Wars, the majority of Lycian cities defaulted from the Delian League, with the exception of Telmessos and Phaselis. In 429 BC, Athens sent an expedition against Lycia to try to force it to rejoin the League. This failed when Lycia's leader Gergis of Xanthos defeated General Melissander. The Lycians once again fell under Persian domination, and were ruled by men such as Mithridates, whose name was Persian, and by 412 BC, Lycia is documented as fighting on the winning side of Persia. The Persian satraps were reinstalled, but they allowed local dynasts the freedom to rule. Persia held Lycia until it was conquered by Alexander III of Macedon during 334–333 BC. Hellenistic period, after the death of Alexander the Great in 324 BC, his generals fought amongst themselves over the succession. Lycia fell into the hands of the general Antigonus by 304 BC. In 301 BC Antigonus was killed by an alliance of the other successors of Alexander, and Lycia became a part of the kingdom of Lysimachus, who ruled until he was killed in battle in 281 BC. By 240 BC Lycia was part of the Ptolemaic kingdom, centered on Egypt, and remained in their control through 200 BC. It had apparently come under Seleucid control by 190 BC, when the Seleucids' defeat in the Battle of Magnesia resulted in Lycia being awarded to Rhodes in the Peace of Apamea in 188 BC. It was then granted autonomy as a protectorate of Rome in 168 BC and remained so until becoming a Roman province in 43 AD under Claudius. Lycian League, formation. The Lycian League is first known from two inscriptions of the early 2nd century BC in which it honors two citizens. Bryce hypothesizes that it was formed as an agent to convince Rome to rescind the annexation of Lycia to Rhodes. Lycia had been under Rhodian control since the Peace of Apamea in 188 BC. A fragment from Livy records a pitiful embassy in 178 BC from Lycia to the Roman Senate complaining that the Lycians were being treated as slaves. Whipping had been instituted as corporeal punishment and the women and children were being abused. The Romans sent back a stern warning with the Lycians to Rhodes, saying that they had not intended the Lycians or any other people born in freedom to be enslaved by Rhodes, and that the assignment was only a protectorate. A fragment from Polybius tells a slightly different version of the story, which has the Romans sending legates to Rhodes to say that the Lycians had not been handed over to Rhodes as a gift, but to be treated like friends and allies. The Rhodians sent an embassy in return claiming that the Lycians had made the story up for reasons of their own and that in fact they were a financial burden on Rhodes. The continuation of the story did not survive, but in 168 BC, Rome took Lycia away from Rhodes and turned over home rule to the League. There was no question of independence. Lycia was not to be sovereign, only self-governing under republican principles. It could neither negotiate with foreign powers nor disobey the Roman Senate. It was not independent. It could govern its own people and for a time mint its own coins as a right granted by Rome. It did not determine its own borders. Land and people could be assigned or taken away by the Senate. Remarking on this protectorate, Strabo says of the government, "Formerly they deliberated about war and peace, and alliances, but this is not now permitted, as these things are under the control of the Romans. It is only done by their consent, or when it may be for their own advantage." Exactly what such a statement might imply is uncertain. Lycia had not been a sovereign state for some time. Whether the Lycian League as such is meant, implying that it existed anciently, or some other similar government is meant, is not clear. The statement does not say also whether there was a gap between the former sovereign state and the new Lycian League, or whether they are to be conceived as chronologically continuous. Composition: according to Strabo, the League comprised some 23 known city-states as members. Lucius Licinius Murena, Roman consul, added 3 more in 81 BC, Balbra, Bubon and Oenoanda, which he had stripped from another systema to the north, the Tetrapolis, Syburitis, or Cabalian League. It was dominated by the city of Sybura, which formed a league approximately contemporaneously with the Lycian League. Sybura ruled the Turkish Lakes region. It was called Sybura Megale, Greater Sybura, to distinguish it from Sybura Micra or Little Sybura near side. The Lakes region is a string of alpine valleys in the folds of the Taurus Mountains, which have no natural exits. Instead they have collected lakes. Sybura was on a low hill to the west of 𝐊𝐊𝐿𝐻𝐿 Valley and 𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐻𝐿 Lake, just north of 𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐻𝐿. Sybura dominated an ancient region, Kabalis, which was divided between the later states of Lycia, Pisidia and Lydia, subsequently incorporated in Phrygia. According to Strabo, it spoke 4 languages, Lydian, even though Lydian had disappeared elsewhere, Greek, Pisidian and that of the Ptolemai. Kabalis, which was later divided into Lycian and Asian Kabalis, was the putative home of the Ptolemai. It included the Malias district of Lycia, putatively the home of the first Lycians. It is possible that they spoke a form of Anatolian earlier than the attested Lycian, which some have dubbed Malian. A further connection of this Malian with Lycian B of 𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐻𝐿 obelisk is pure fantasy. Unlike the Lycian League, the Syburitis was ruled by a succession of deliberately ostentatious and high-handed tyrants. Having become a thorn in the side of Rome, they attracted the attention of Gnaeus Manlius Vulso, commander of the Roman armies successfully fighting the Galatian War of 189 BC. Manlius turned toward Syburitis with the intent of removing the thorn. The tyrant, Mogitz, barely escaped with his life and his position by entering the Roman camp dressed in humble clothing, with a handful of similarly dressed assistants, claiming destitution and begging for mercy. He offered a payment of 15 talents. Manlius set the payment at 500 talents, a huge sum, impossible of payment. Finally moved to mercy, he allowed Mogitz to bargain him down to 100 and a substantial payment of grain, necessary to the Roman commissary. When the Romans had departed, Mogitz dropped the pretense, and Syburitis resumed its arrogance. Consequently, when Murena did finally deal with Syburitis, he had no political mercy. Strabo says that Bubon and Balbra were transferred to the Lycian League forthwith. He does not mention Oenoanda, but it had been a city of the Lycians anyway. It minted coinage of the League subsequently. there is no evidence that Sibylla was ever admitted to the League, although that assumption sometimes is made. It was in Asian Kabylia and as such was joined to Phrygia later, an event supported by their coin issues. The last tyrant of the Tetrapolis was also named Mogitz, a different one, unless the term was a title, or Strabo made a mistake. The 23 at first and then 26 city-states joined together in a federal-style government that shared political and economic resources. An 𐊗���𐊐𐊆𐊖 was elected by a senate that convened by agreement beforehand at what city they please. Each member had 1, 2 or 3 votes, depending on the city's size. The diminishment of some cities over time caused them to join with the major state in their vicinity to form a sympolity. In that case they lost their vote, assuming an influence in the vote of the major city. After election of the Lyciarch, the Senate voted for the other public officials and the magistrates. The League's government took precedence, but, as in many federal systems, the issue was not entirely settled, and the resulting civil conflict led to the dissolution of the Union. Strabo identified the major cities of the League. That is, the 3-vote cities, as Xanthos, Patara, Panara, Olympos, Myra, and Tlos, with Patara as the capital. The full complement has been identified by a study of the coins and mention in other texts. The coins recognize 2 districts, termed, for want of a better term, monetary districts, Massicitus and Krigas, both named after mountain ranges, in the shadow of which, presumably, the communities lived and conducted business. Where coinage before the Lycian League had often been stamped Li for Lycia, it was now stamped KP or MA. Treaty with Rome, an inscription from Tiberissos records the treaty between Rome and Lycian League, which is of a type the Romans called a fidus. It was much used between Italian cities and Rome, except that their treaties provided for contributions to Rome, but this one does not. There is a general statement in 4 clauses. The general statement establishes peace, friendship, and loyal alliance by land and sea for all time. The 4 clauses provide for neutrality of Rome to the enemies of the Lycian League, neutrality of the Lycian League to the enemies of Rome, mutual assistance in the case of first aggression by an enemy against either, and alteration of the treaty only by joint agreement. The treaty is written as though between independent and co-equal states, but all parties knew that this was conventional hypocrisy. The Lycian League was subject to the decisions of the Roman Senate and the decrees of the Roman emperors, but not vice versa. Only the Roman state was powerful. Roman period. In 43 AD, the Emperor Claudius annexed Lycia to the Roman Empire as a province, and by the time of Vespasian, it was united with Pamphylia as a Roman province. The heir of Augustus, Gaius Caesar, was killed there in 4 AD. Byzantine era. It subsequently was a part of the Byzantine Empire. Turkish era, it was incorporated into the Ottoman Empire and eventually became part of Turkey. A substantial Christian community of Greeks lived in Lycia until the 1920s, when they were forced to migrate to Greece after the population exchange between Greece and Turkey following the Greco-Turkish War in the early 20th century. The abandoned Greek villages in the region are a striking reminder of this exodus. Abandoned Greek houses can still be seen in the towns of Dem, Kalkan and Kaz, and Kara is a Greek ghost town. A small population of Turkish farmers moved into the region when the Lycian Greeks migrated to Greece. The region is now one of the key centers of domestic and foreign tourism in Turkey. Episcopal sees. Ancient episcopal sees of Lycia listed in the Annuario Pontificio as titular sees. See also, Lycian script, Tomb of Amyntas, Lycian Way, references. Sources, primary sources, a 𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 poem on the Battle of Kadesha €305 a €313, Rameses II, a 𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 Great Karnak inscription of €572 a €592, Monepta. Breasted, J.H. 1906. Ancient Records of Egypt. Vol. 3. Chicago, University of Chicago Press. A 𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐿 Plague Prayers of Merciless a €1 a €11, b. Merciless. Pritchard, J.B. 1969. Ancient Near Eastern Texts. Princeton, Princeton University Press. Secondary sources, Barnett, R.D. The Sea Peoples. In J. B. Berry. S. A. Cook. F. E. Adcock. The Cambridge Ancient History. 2, Part 2. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press pp. 362 a €366 a refers to many different sea peoples and their contact with Egypt and Anatolia. Also tells about the Philistines during the reign of Rameses III. Bryce, T. Lycia Revisited. Journal of Near Eastern Studies 51, 121 a €130 doi, 10.1086/373535 a discusses Lycia's relations to other regions and where they inhabited. Bryce, T. Zor, J. The Lycians 1. Copenhagen, Museum Tusculanum Press a covers the Lycians and where they lived, their history, language, culture, cults, and their language. Druze, are the end of the Bronze Age, changes in warfare and the catastrophe circa 1200 BC. Princeton, Princeton University Press a description of the Egyptian evidence on the Sea Peoples. Hill, George Francis. Catalogue of the Greek coins of Lycia, Pamphylia, and Pisidia. A catalogue of the Greek coins in the British Museum. London, Trustees of the British Museum a presentation of the history of Lycia during the time of its minting coins, and the coins. Keene, Anthony G. 1992. Dynastic Lycia, A Political History of the Lycians and Their Relations with Foreign Powers, c. 545-362 BC. Mnemosyne, Bibliotheca Classica Batavia. Supplementum. Leiden. Boston. Car paragraph LN, Briller, external links, Satyuk, Patty. Satyuk, Kemal. Lycian Turkey LycianTurkey.com. Retrieved February 14, 2012. Walker, Christopher. Anderson, Thorne. Splendid Ruins for an Excellent Republic. Saudi Aramco World. Camia, Tokyo. Lycian Influence to the Indian Cave Temples. Retrieved February 20, 2012. Voss, Peter W. Lycia. Encyclopedia of the Roman Provinces. Virtual Tours/Myra, Mahmutla, Lara. EDS Systems of full-screen panoramas of the rock-cut tombs of the ancient Lycian necropolis at Myra, Virtual Tour Eurodem. Myra. Alexander Peskov Photography. 2011. Clough, Kate. Lycian Way Guidebook. Retrieved August 2014. A.